So, Kieran, could you just please introduce yourself and let us know what your involvement with the game is?
Sure. I'm the Studio Communications Manager for Creative Assembly, based in Horsham. Obviously, we created the Total War series. The great part about the Communications Manager position is I get my finger in a lot of little pies all over the studio, from kind of design to AI to art and everything else. So it's kind of an overall position in terms of communication between all the different departments, which gives you a really good overview of everything that's going on in the game. So that's what I do.
Okay. And so I saw, I think you mentioned that Napoleon will perfect everything that Empire Total War was meant to be. Do you feel that you fell short with Empire? What's the story?
It's one of those things where, rather than looking at it like perfecting, I would say that Empire is at work at a code base of its own right, and that involved a whole ton of research and development. And then from there, you take all of those things and you push them to the absolute maximum before you have to do a whole load more research and development. And that is what Napoleon is. So I would look at kind of Napoleon as the eventual and final product of all that work. I don't think necessarily that Empire fell short, although it certainly wasn't necessarily as we intended it upon release. I'd say certainly now Empire is a pretty fantastic gameplay experience. So in that sense, I'd say that Napoleon is an achievement in its own right. It's got so much of its own code base that it's separate now. And also that, since release, Empire is now a great deal stronger.
So why did you decide that Napoleon should be a standalone title as opposed to the usual route of rolling out an expansion pack?
Well, the way we're kind of phrasing Napoleon at the moment is it's got, I guess you'd call it like a premium standalone expansion. In that the first thing we wanted to do, we thought, all right, we can augment all of this into Empire. But when we began with the technology and everything else, it just got to a point where it got so far advanced we had to break it from the main game code. That put it in a standalone, basically. That put it in a standalone position. In terms of the thematic and the actual game itself, when we began looking at Napoleon, it was just such a case of, okay, we could do this, but if we're going to do it properly, it's going to need sort of a whole storyline. It's going to need its own campaigns, and that took it into standalone territory, which is just why it ended up as it did.
So in a nutshell, what are the core enhancements that distance this game from its predecessor?
Well, I guess, you've got the basics, which is the visuals. So the first thing you're going to see is that the particle effects, the lighting, all the seasonal stuff has been radically improved for Napoleon. All of the unit rendering gives us a great deal more detail amongst the guys themselves. Then you've got kind of the more subtle code-based changes stuff. That kind of takes place on the kind of AI and physics level and then the campaign map. And you've got tactical changes, which result in gameplay differences. You've got shorter turn times across 3 separate campaigns, all of which are kind of geographically much more detailed and much more kind of stronger experience in terms of a narrative and a gameplay and a story. So I think what our kind of traditional fans are going to find is that they're playing a very different type of game in terms of the focus and the way that it's played, especially with all the different gameplay tweaks and the mechanics changes. And indeed, they're going to be playing our best looking and best performing game today as well.
The Grand Campaign is seen by some gamers to be the meat of the series traditionally. Is this something you're moving away from with this kind of episode-based?
No, not at all. I mean, if anything, what we're doing is trying to give more of that for the player's time. So each of Napoleon's episodes essentially are their own full campaign. You can call them, most people call them Grand Campaign, they call it a large geographic area with which there are multiple factions. Each of these campaigns is a large geographic area with multiple factions. So each of them give you their own campaign experience. But in terms of what you would call the traditional Grand European or kind of Grand Worldwide campaign, no, we're not moving away from those kind of things. We know the benefit of those. We love to play them, so they'll be a feature of our games from here on in, always as they have been. So the Grand European campaign for Napoleon, you can play as France and play through the story, or you can play as the other nations of Europe, and we call that the campaigns of the coalition. And all of those nations have their own goals and their own kind of objectives, which obviously are adverse to France. So that Grand Campaign element is still very much within Napoleon, and it's still very much a focus of Total War games.
You mentioned that you've announced a drop-in campaign multiplayer feature. Is this something that fans have been asking for?
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those things that we've kind of always wanted to do, but without initially using Steam, and now having had Steam for one product and kind of building it into Napoleon from the off. It's been a really fantastic kind of thing for us to go, actually, you know what, we can just drop this in. It's kind of a lobby system. So basically you just go, okay, I'm playing my battles on my campaign. I want to keep my story to myself, but I also want to involve other people in my experience. So in doing so, by adding the drop-in battles, it means you keep that sense of narrative which is just yours. It's just your campaign, it's your activities. But you add that kind of multiplayer element and the random of having other people come in and fight the battles, land or sea, against you. And so I think it's a pretty good addition to the series.
Okay, and my final question is, how do you make a game like how do you make a series like Total War remain accessible for newcomers, but at the same time remaining interesting and deep enough for hardcore?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always the balance, which is that essentially you have to kind of you've got to keep two camps happy. You've got the hardcore, and like you say, you've got the kind of people who want a more accessible game to begin with. And the strategy we always go down, and we try and keep improving with each game, including Napoleon, is that we make the surface easy to master, but the depth difficult to finally completely pursue. So all the command and control stuff should be easy to get a hold of. You know, a little bit of practice, a little bit of play. Okay, I know what I'm doing. I know how to move guys around. But then we let players develop their own strategies and their own kind of tactics beyond that. So the idea is that you learn all the basics very, very quickly. That's for the accessibility and the new players. And then you create your own tactics and advances in a more deep and long-term fashion, which is for the more hardcore guys. And indeed for people who kind of want to play more over time. So hopefully catering for both camps. You know, so it's an improvement process, but we're getting there.
Great. Okay. I think we can wrap it up there.
Smallest camera ever, by the way. You guys can't see this, but this camera's about this big.